Good morning, everybody. Dear friends, on behalf of the International Support Network for Alienated Families, I want to welcome you to our third annual conference, Parent Alienation, Current Trends and Practical Applications. My name is George Ross, and I'm the CEO of this organization. First and foremost, I want to thank Karen Lebo. Where's Karen? She's in the back there. Karen's the founder of the organization, and I want to thank her for her tireless effort over the past 4 years to form and grow this organization to where it is today. Karen's vision and our mission is to provide families with the tools to reunify with their children through in-person support group network meetings, seminars, research, referrals, conferences, to address the issues that parents may encounter. We intend to effect reform in the mental health, legal, legislative, judicial, and educational arenas so that parents and children alike can benefit from the system rather than suffer because of it. I know many of you have come a long distance to come to today's event. Anybody come from out of state? Wow, quite a few. I know I've met somebody from Texas. Where else? Oklahoma? Seattle. Arizona. South Dakota. Fantastic. Not all 50 states, but quite a few. Thank you very much for coming. ISNAF is a nonprofit 501c3 corporation and is a support network for those suffering the pain and bewilderment of losing a child due to the dynamics of parent alienation. ISNAF is led by well-trained, skilled, and experienced mental health professionals, and our hope is that people look to ISNAF for approaches with healthy family reunification in mind. Our program today includes some of the most esteemed experts in their respective fields. They are dedicated to this cause, and their enthusiasm and compassion to share their knowledge and experiences will most certainly be inspiring and empowering. Our keynote is being delivered by Dr. J. Michael Bone. His presentation will cover the do's and don'ts of telling the story of parent alienation in the family court. Much of our past audiences for this conference have been targeted parents, nearly exclusively. However, this year our attendees seem to be well represented in the psychological and legal worlds, as well as targeted parents. Accordingly, we've gathered together a diverse panel of noteworthy presenters. It goes without saying that the subject discussed today may be quite confronting to many of us who are faced with PA in our lives. So I understand if a speaker looks out to the audience and finds some emotional faces. I want to personally thank each and every one of you for coming to today's event, as I know you have busy schedules. I'm certain you'll take away some good ideas, thoughts, answers, and perhaps more importantly, find someone that you can lean on, or you might be the support someone else can rely on. It is my hope that you'll find more reasons to be involved in ISNAF and partner with us to promote healthy family relationships. Our next presenter is Dorcey Russell. Dorcey is the founder and CEO of Conscious Co-Parenting Institute. She is a reunification coach and co-parent educator. She has devoted her career to providing strategies and solutions for parents and children struggling through parent alienation and high-conflict divorce. The primary focus of Dorcey's work is high-conflict custody disputes involving parent alienation under the pretense of divorce. Her goal is to help establish custody plans and co-parenting roles that encourage positive relationships between children and both parents. Working with both mothers and fathers, she has spent her time dealing with the high-conflict divorce as a family reunification coach and custody consultant, both nationally and internationally. She has worked on hundreds of cases, garnering positive results. Dorcey provides education through parenting courses focused on solutions for parent alienation. She provides education and consulting coaching services and solutions for parents, attorneys, and children going through custody battles and divorce. Dorcey has extensive experience in all aspects of parent alienation, especially from her own personal experience as a child, as a divorced, conscious co-parent of two beautiful daughters, and through past and current relationships where a significant other was alienated from his child. She has been working for the past 3 years with targeted parents and children, helping them overcome the realities of parent alienation. Please welcome Dorcey Russell.
My name is Dorcey Pruder now, formerly Dorcey Russell, as most of you who know me as Dorcey Russell. And As George said, I'm the CEO and founder of the Conscious Co-Parenting Institute, and I'm here today to share with you some techniques and really valuable strategies that have helped not only myself, but my clients shift their consciousness around parental alienation and high conflict divorce. And I don't have a lot of time, so I might be going kind of fast, so I'll be here all day, so if you want to ask me questions or whatever in the back of the room, feel free to come up and ask me questions. So what makes me, let me go ahead and talk about what a high conflict parent is. And this slide's a little messed up, so I apologize for that. But a high conflict parent is somebody that is dealing with unmanaged emotions. They don't know how to control themselves. So they have outrage, they cry, they scream, they threaten, as most of you know, dealing with a high conflict co-parent. They also are preoccupied with blaming other people for their problems. They're never wrong. The other person is always wrong. So they're struggling with taking responsibility for their lives. And they also have extreme behaviors. So they are extreme in their reaction to everything. They have, they hit, sometimes you, sometimes the children, sometimes other people. Not necessarily always violent, but oftentimes very physical, block you from leaving a room, extreme behaviors. And then also they have all or nothing thinking. And all or nothing thinking is black and white thinking. I'm all right, you're all wrong. They can't make a decision unless the decision is based on their opinion and what they think the resolution should be. So this is the definition, or brief definition, of a high conflict parent. And these people are really challenging to deal with, as most everybody in this room knows, because most everybody is here because they're dealing with somebody who is a high conflict personality. And I want to talk a little bit about who I am and what you'll learn today. So what we're going to learn is what a high conflict divorce really is and how you got here. So not just the definition, but why are you here and how are you entangled in a high conflict divorce and what you can do about it. And then also skills and tools to really assist the children that are dealing with high conflict divorce. These kids are stuck in the middle. They don't know what to do. They're really aligning themselves with a parent because they have no idea what else to do. And then guidance for you on how to really be healthy role models for your children. We get so mired in responding to the toxicity that's thrown at us from high conflict personalities that oftentimes we respond in the same way, and so we forget how to be a healthy role model for our children. And then also how to avoid the common causes and staying stuck in a high conflict divorce. So you get there, you're involved in it, and why are you staying stuck in it? So I'm going to teach you some ways on how to actually get unstuck, how to unhook yourself from a high conflict parent. And then some reunification options, so to reunite, reconnect, and create a lasting bond with alienating children. So does that sound good? So what is a high conflict divorce? It is, everybody has conflict in their divorce, right? If we didn't have a conflict, we'd probably still be married. But a high conflict divorce moves beyond what is reasonable, right? It's during these transitional times, high conflict personalities move beyond what is normal stress and fear and depression into things that are much more, much larger, much more intense. And it makes it difficult to maintain family ties when you're dealing with people that are high conflict personality traits, because they're trying to align themselves with your child or your children. And so it really makes it challenging to work with this person and try to have some sort of a healthy tie with them. And then also, a seemingly reasonable person starts to completely act like a crazy person in response to the high conflict personality person. I'm sure all of us have done that. I know I have. And then it's an environment that really fosters parent-child alienation. And you'll hear me refer to this as parent-child alienation. I don't really talk about parental alienation or parent-child alienation that much in my coaching, but since everybody here is familiar with that term, I'm going to use it today. But I use parent-child alienation because the alienation isn't just with the parent. There's a child involved, or sometimes children. So today I'm going to share with you some really great information about how to reconnect with your children, some wonderful strategies that will really help you move beyond parental alienation or a toxic relationship in your life. And there are 3 questions that determine parental or parent-child alienation. And I'm not going to go into what it is because everybody here knows what or parental alienation is, or at least has a general idea of it. But prior to the rejection, there was a normal, loving relationship between you and your child. And so it's not people who had no relationship and then now want to have a relationship with their child. It's really you had to have a relationship before. And if there was a prior history of a better relationship, are you exhibiting behaviors that is really causing your relationship with your child to deteriorate? And would the reason that your child gives for the new separation or the negative attitude towards you, would that be sufficient to rupture the actual relationship, or is that a contribution of the favored parent? So I'm going to share with you some tips and tools and strategies today, but before I do that, I'm going to share a brief story about myself. Who am I and why am I qualified to teach this material? Like my picture? So I used to be afraid of the question when I started working with families going through parental alienation, because people would ask me, well, who are you to teach this? Are you a licensed therapist? Are you a family law attorney? Are you a counselor? And it used to scare me, because the answer to all of those questions is no, I'm none of those things. And I'm a certified life coach, and I would get nervous. And the truth is, I've been exactly where every single person in this room has been. Not only did I go through my own divorce 10 years ago, I also am a child of parental alienation. My parents divorced when I was 5. It was extremely high conflict. In the first couple of years, it was kind of good sometimes, but only when everybody agreed with my mother. When it was her way, everybody got along. But when it wasn't, it was a disaster. And I didn't really understand what was going on as a child. I was really close with my father for the first 5 years of my life. And after that, my parents divorced. There was a huge crevasse that was created, not just with my father, but my father's family, and then my mother's family when they disagreed with her. So alienation runs really deep in my history. And when I went through my divorce, I went through a lot of the emotions that everybody goes through. I was ashamed, I was guilty, and I was really embarrassed. And I didn't really understand what was going on, although I was the one who decided to get married. I moved across country when I was 18 from my crazy mother, and with a crazy toxic boyfriend, I guess that was a better option. And then I ended up marrying a gentleman from the South when I was at the ripe young age of 22. I knew everything at 22. And we were married for 9.5 years. We had 2 beautiful children, and I decided that I didn't want to be married anymore. I decided I wanted to have kids, and then a few years later I decided I didn't want to be married anymore. And so I made the decision to get married, I made the decision to have children, and I made the decision to get divorced. And so making all those decisions were great, except they also caused a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. And my husband at the time was visiting my mother when I decided to move him out of our home after our marriage had deteriorated. And my mother said to me on the phone, "Oh, great. Now the children are going to associate a trip to Grandma Jean's house with the loss of a parent." I was like, what? I had no idea, even through my own personal experience, what in the world she was talking about. I was like, who's losing a parent? What are you talking about? I had no idea what my mother was actually talking about is me, that she was going to go on a denigration campaign with my husband, ex-husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, to try to destroy the relationship between me and my 2 small children. I went into denial. I went into the victim mindset. I couldn't believe how horrible my mother was and how horrible my ex-husband was and how horrible everybody in my family was for aligning themselves with my husband. And, I went into also this deep, deep, deep guilt of I was the one who made the decision. I moved him out, and I also had the deep guilt of, while I said I would never get divorced, I would never ever create a broken home for my children, but I just couldn't stay in the marriage anymore. And so for a few years, I let this spin in my head and in my life and out of control, and all the while continuing to be a victim of parental alienation, a victim of my circumstance, a victim of being raised in a home with alienation, and until I made a decision that I was no longer going to be a victim. And it was a very defining moment for me, and I had no idea how I was going to stop doing that. I just knew that I was going to stop being a victim, and somehow I was going to shift what was going on in my life. And so what does that mean for you? Well, I don't need to go through this slide, but the victim mindset, I was the victim, right? A lot of us here are victims of parental alienation. Our children have been taken from us. People are saying horrible things about us. That target or the alienating parent is throwing us under the bus in our community. People aren't talking to us. We're losing friends and family. And I always looked for the rescuer, the person who could save me from this horrible stuff that was happening to me. And when that person wasn't agreeing with what I wanted to do, I swung over to the other side, and that person was then the persecutor. I didn't like that person anymore, and they weren't aligning themselves with what I was believing. So I was in the victim mindset, and all of us as human beings get stuck in the victim mindset. It's part of who we are and how we come into the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that right now and what that actually means for you and how this one thing changed my life forever. My belief on what it was that I deserved. I believed when I got married, I believed when I got divorced, and I believed for a while after I got divorced that I deserved on a subconscious level everything that was happening to me because I was the one who made the decision that I was guilty of all these things. And it wasn't happening in my conscious mind. I didn't have an awareness of what was actually happening, so I kept bringing it in again and again and again. And so I was the victim. And it's not that much different than the victim mindset of the alienating parent, right? They're the victim of you big bad target parent, right? They're the victim of never having anything go their way. They're the victim of divorce, right? They're the victim of being abandoned. That's a big one for alienating parents, right? The fear of abandonment. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I am going to talk to you a little bit about how the victim mindset gets programmed in. We're born with 3 levels of consciousness. Every single human being on this planet is connected as one, and we all have these 3 levels of consciousness. We have our lower self, our middle self, and our higher self-consciousness. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about these different parts of our consciousness. We all relate to this one here, right? This is our lower self. It's our fear-based, childlike part of our consciousness that gets programmed in at a very early age. It's basic, and it's primitive, and it's programmed like a computer. And it is the part of us that throws tantrums and reacts to stimulus in a response manner. And it's a fearful 2-year-old child throwing a tantrum. Needs to be right at all costs. Our lower self needs to be right. And it needs to feel like a victim, crave attention and control from the outside world. And it's the part of us that runs and avoids or freezes when we experience something that doesn't feel comfortable. Our middle self, this is our mind, our rational, logical mind, and it's based on logic, and it chooses the appropriate response based on information that it gets from the lower self and the higher self. And it always allows us to feel and experience all of our emotions. We are not our emotions, but this is a part of our consciousness that allows us to feel our emotions. It's the filter, if you will. Again, the filter of the lower and the higher self-consciousness. And then the higher self is who we really are. It's our true spirit. It's our connection to each other, like Karen was talking about. We're all connected as one true energy of the human consciousness. And it's beyond our physical body, and it's beyond our emotional body, and it's beyond our logical mind, and it's in touch with who we are, our purpose on this planet as individuals. It's our spiritual energy, it's unconditional love, truth and trust, responsibility and intuition, it's compassion for other people, and it's that joy and empowerment and inner peace that we experience. 99% of who we are is higher self-consciousness. 99% of our time we spend reacting in our lower self-consciousness. Now, this isn't just you or just me. This is most people on this planet. We're wired from an early age to react in our lower self-consciousness. Higher self is our love consciousness, and lower self is our fear consciousness. So how does it get programmed in? Well, it gets programmed through something I like to call a decision-forming incident. And a decision-forming incident is a very specific moment in our life that contains either pain, loss, or unconsciousness, or the perception of pain, loss, or unconsciousness, okay? The lower self takes over when we experience a decision-forming incident. We're completely thrown into fear, and this is most powerful when we're quite young. And oftentimes when I help people process through decision-forming incidents, these are things that happened before they were a year old. I'll share a quick story with you. When I was an infant, when I was born, my father was hunting, And my mom was really upset. She wanted to go to Woodstock, and she went into 6 hours of labor on her 21st birthday with me, or 6 days, I'm sorry, of labor. 21st birthday with me, 6 days later I was born. My dad wasn't there. You can imagine she wasn't very happy. And so when my dad came home from hunting, he wasn't really thrilled that I was the second child and I was another girl. So my mom and my father got in an argument. I was a tiny little baby, and he tossed me across, or my mother picked me up out of a dead sleep and tossed me across the room. And my dad caught me, and I was in meditation, and I had this vision of this, and I called my dad, who I reunited with a few years ago, and I said, "Dad, did this happen?" And he said, "Yes, as a matter of fact." And he then gave me all the details of the story. And the reason I was doing a meditation was I don't sleep very much. I sleep maybe 1 or 2 hours at a time, and then I'll wake up and be up for a while and sleep a little bit more. And I wanted to know why that was. And it was really astounding. And that night I slept like 10 hours straight. I've never done that before. I really haven't done it since, but it was a pretty miraculous discovery for me that this was something that happened when I was a baby. I was just a few days old, but I had created a story in my mind that I need to always be alert. I can't really fully sleep because something bad might happen to me, okay? I have a big house, or had a big house, and my kids slept upstairs on the other side of the room, and a lot of people had baby monitors. I didn't need a baby monitor. I could kid you not, I could hear my children breathing in their room. I was so in tune with what was going on when I slept. So the lower self believes that our future survival really is determined by what was decided during our decision-forming incidents. Literally, we create a story, we tuck it in our subconscious mind, and it stays there until we wake up to what the story is. So most of these specific moments most of these moments are specific during the decision-forming incident. So for example, when my father left my mother and slammed the door screaming, "You ruined our family," very specific, right? All of a sudden, our lower self kicks in and a story starts playing itself in our head, and we start to create what I like to call our cellular memory, a data tape of information. And then, as opposed to when my parents got divorced, right? Vague, specific. It's a specific moment in time. So how does it affect us? We start to avoid any situation that's similar to the decision-forming incident, yet at the same time, we attract it. We're attracting that situation to wake us up to our story, to what we created in our subconscious mind to shift. We start to perceive ourselves, our life, and everyone around us through that filter, right? And a lot of people have psychology backgrounds in this room. They can talk about that. Then we start to manipulate our life. We start to manipulate the people and the situation to fit our story, what we believe to be true. And if it doesn't, we leave. And then we start to create our act. And our act is what a lot of people in the therapeutic community call the persona. It's who we feel like we have to be in the world in order to get people to like us or not like us. And then we do to others what was done to us, or we don't do to others what was done to us. So our pendulum swings in the all or nothing mindset, right? We react, we become like a winner, and then we focus outward. We stop looking inside to find out what it was, the story that we created, and we start looking to others to fix this for us. We start looking outward, and that holds us stuck. We get stuck in our story, and it repeats over and over and over again. So the lower self literally believes that living life from what was decided during a decision-forming incident will keep you from further pain and loss. Even though your logical mind, your middle self says, well, that's ridiculous, there's no way. And a lot of you, I know, I can feel the energy in the room. It's like, that's ridiculous. I know better. I know I believe I deserve something more. I know. And I've been there. And I've resisted as well. And when I changed my mind, when I made a decision to think differently and to change my mind, my life changed. My relationship with my children blossomed. My relationship with my ex-husband blossomed. And although we still have conflict in our divorce, we've been divorced for 10 years, even though we still have struggles, our communication has shifted. It's shifted from conflict and struggle and strife to resolution and meeting and compromise, which is what I'm trying to get everybody to understand today. So, these false beliefs literally run our lives from then on, and the lower self will really do anything to prove that it's right. We get stuck in us being right. So whenever you find yourself saying, no, I know I'm right about this, and parental alienation, when we're target parents, this is a really hard subject because we really want to dig our heels here. We really want to be stuck here because there's an old story playing in our mind, and so we want to be right. And the truth is, you are right. The truth is, everything that's happening around you is actually happening, but what can you do about it? And the lower self really believes what it's decided about yourself, life, and others during a DFI, and anything, literally will do anything. And here's a perfect example of a child who created a broad generalized decisions, or lots of decisions about a mother that hit her, okay? Women and mothers are violent. Women and mothers hurt me. Anger is scary. I can't protect myself. I don't trust myself. People don't care about me, and I don't trust women. I must stay away from women to be safe. I must pretend. I must act to be safe. I must be numb, not feel, and suppress my pain. I can't feel my pain. How many of us have actually felt that, right? I can't feel this anymore. It's too painful. I must save others from violence. We start to become the advocate of what happened to us. I must be like my mother to be strong. We align ourselves with the person who we view in early childhood as the person who has the most strength, the survivor, if you will. And I must be a good mother. I can't be a good mother. This was a story I had. I must get hit, attract violence to be right. I had this story. I moved to the East Coast with a very abusive boyfriend and, stayed in that situation for a while. And people who know me now go, I don't believe you, but it's true. It was extremely violent. I had that story. I cause women to be violent. So the most powerful, significant decisions we make during a decision-forming incident is that we caused something to happen. A decision-forming incident always has that aspect in some way. So we have this belief that we caused all of this to happen. And there's a little bit of truth to that. There's a little bit of truth in what we're attracting in our life. So then we grow up and we have what we call buttons, or the therapeutic community a lot of times calls it a trigger. We have our triggers, our buttons pushed to wake us up. And buttons are anything that we can experience through sight, smell, touch, taste, sound, words, emotions, thoughts, or even just sensing. And all of these things are our buttons, so we get re-stimulated in our old story. Something happens that's similar to what happened to us when we were young, and then we're in a button. And so we start to get defensive. We need to be right in our lower self. We get negative emotions pop up for us. We feel separate, alone, and alienated. And we feel like a victim and a martyr, and we feel inferior or superior. All of these things are real, by the way. These are all things that we're creating in our life. We feel irrational and unable to think clearly a lot of times. We feel like running and escaping. We desire to strike out at a cause. We get sarcastic and cynical. We feel tired and drained for no apparent reason. And then also yawning, physical pain for no apparent reason, and a belief starts to recite itself in our head, and we feel powerless to a situation, and we start to feel apathy, hopelessness, and depression. How many people have felt a lot of these things about their situation, right? It's a button, right? We're in a button, and we create it over and over and over again, and you're thinking, okay, crazy lady, I'm not creating anything. My ex is a high conflict personality disorder person, and so I'm having a hard time with this. I get it, and I'll get to this in a second. So this is what triggers our think, feel, do cycle. And we have a thought, and then a feeling, and then an action. This is how we operate in our life. And most of the time we have a thought and it's fleeting, and then we have a feeling, and then we have an action, which then creates the next event. And in the thought is where our victim mindset kicks in, and usually we then transfer it into fear. So there's an example here of a mom, and she's supposed to be, and these are all examples from situations, she's supposed to be picking up Johnny from his dad's house. Dad has a date with a new girlfriend, has tickets for an event, and mom shows up late. Mom always shows up late, and dad's mad. So his thought is, she's doing this on purpose. She always does this on purpose. She's ruining my life. And then that turns into fury and rage. He's upset, right? She's doing this to me. I'm really mad. And then mom gets there late, and in front of his son, he tears up the tickets and screams and cusses at her. The kid feels anxiety. He's mad, and she gets mad and storms off with the child. And then the next time, she doesn't bring the child because dad's crazy and he can't control his emotions, and the child doesn't want to be around dad. So this is just an example of the think, feel, do cycle, and a great example of how it happens in our subconscious mind. Have you ever been driving in the car, and then a car kind of eases into your lane, and the first thing you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna die, right? It's your first thought, and then you get back and you're like, and then the next thing is you're mad, right? All right, that jerk tried to hit me, and you're really mad, and you flip the guy off, like, hey, he just swung. That's how it happens. It happens that fast, and that fast it triggers old story in our subconscious mind, this stuff that we keep telling ourselves over and over again. So what fuels this high conflict divorce? Well, high conflict personality disorders. I'm not going to go into detail about what all of these are, but borderline, narcissism, paranoid, antisocial, and also histrionic. These are the disorders that the therapeutic community really understands well, and some of you, maybe all of you, have heard all of this terminology and use it. I'm not going to go into detail about what these personalities are, but these are the personalities that drive and fuel high conflict divorce in one or both parents. And high conflict personality is a pattern of behavior. So as you're talking about high conflict divorce and you're talking about this parent that you're co-parenting with, it's important to tell the therapeutic and legal community that they have a personality pattern of behavior. If you start talking about a disorder, then what are you doing? You're pushing a button, right? People are, oh, I don't have a disorder. So they start to freak out. And then also, if you're dealing with people in the community, the professional community, about 10 to 20% of people in the therapeutic and legal community also have high conflict personality traits. And so it might push a button for them. And have any of you been in conflict in your divorce where your person is fighting for like everything and to shift custody and creating a lot of conflict? A lot of times that happens, and it happens because they're getting buttons pushed. And you don't need to wait for a professional to diagnose some sort of a disorder in order to learn ways to work with these people. And the diagnosis and treatment of these personalities we're not going to actually talk about today. But one of the things I want you to remember is to keep calm. And when you're talking about personality traits and you're talking about the therapeutic and legal community, keep calm is just a great acronym to keep yourself grounded and centered. And Karen was talking about a great breathing technique to just breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. I like to breathe on the lucky number 7. I like to breathe in on 7, hold on 7, and out on 7. And as I'm breathing in calming, relaxing energy, and I'm holding and visualizing that energy moving through my body and healing me, and then breathing out any toxic fear and stress. So I like the lucky number 7. So KEEP stands for knowledge, energy, and explain patterns, okay? So you want to be knowledgeable about what you're talking about with dealing with a high conflict pattern, and you want to keep your energy. These people will suck the life out of a room and suck the life out of you, and they do it when you're married to them, and then they do it probably more when you're separated and divorced. So it's important to keep working on your energy and working on your internal game and making sure that you're staying grounded. And then to be able to explain to the therapeutic and legal community that these are patterns of behavior. What happens with most people when they go to court is you're spinning, right? You're reacting to something that's happened. You're reacting. And so you're only reacting to the issue at hand instead of literally creating a chronology of events and seeing a pattern of behavior. You may have heard people talking about, say, borderline, right? Oh yeah, that's my ex. But then they start talking about narcissism and you're like, oh yeah, that's her too, or whatever it is, right? Get educated, have some knowledge about what this person is like so that you can talk about the patterns of behavior. And if you create your chronology of events, then that starts to pull out different patterns of behavior. Not only is it great for the people that are working with you, it's great for you because you can then start to see you're not going crazy, that you're dealing with somebody who has a pattern of behavior, right? So maybe it's blocking or screaming at you at the soccer games or screaming at the kids at the soccer games. I mean, there's patterns of behavior with these people. And then calm, consider alternative litigation and manage your emotions. So what that is saying is to consider ways to not have to go to court. And I know this probably seems foreign to a lot of people who are probably in and out of court, but I want you to know that my mother is probably the most toxic, high conflict personality trait person I've ever met, and she probably teaches classes I'm unaware of, but she can poke a button in me and cause me to just be inflamed, and it's hard to stay calm. And she aligned herself with my ex-husband, who's much more passive-aggressive, and we were able to settle everything, every component of my divorce outside of court. I never, ever, ever had to go in front of the judge to settle anything. I was able to manage my own emotions and respond and mirror calming emotions with my ex in order to make decisions and compromise without ever having to go to court in a high conflict custody situation. It is possible. You can do it. So what also fuels high conflict divorce, and Bill Eddy talks about this, is splitting. High conflict personality traits have all or nothing thinking, right? They think black or white. It's my way or the highway. You either do it my way or you get the heck out of Dodge. And then they have unmanaged emotions like we talked about earlier. They can't control how they respond to things and extreme behaviors. You know, when I first divorced, my ex would probably say I was the high conflict parent, and there were times I was constantly, you know, trying to manipulate and get him to do what I wanted him to do, and he wasn't really going for it. So there are 3 key points to avoiding high conflict divorce. One is they're not driven by the issues. So I was just saying a minute ago, oftentimes we go to court and we're responding to something that's happened. Well, we're responding to an issue that really isn't the issue, because people with personality traits, they aren't dealing with the issue. They're always dealing with whatever emotion is coming up. So I know if you're dealing with these kinds of personality traits, you've worked with people or your co-parent, you're trying to have a conversation with them, and the next thing they know, they're talking about the divorce that happened 6 years ago and how you abandoned them and how this is terrible. And you're like, I just want to take my kid to the soccer game. Like, what are we talking about? This has nothing to do with you. And I now have to work because when I was married to you, I didn't have to work. And now I have to work. And so I've got to have a job and pay bills. And, you know, all of a sudden you start to do what? You start to take on their emotion, and you start to get rattled, and you start to respond in a high conflict way because it's annoying, right? And then reasonable parents and professionals respond, right, with this high conflict pattern because it's irritating. You're like, are you kidding? This is completely irrelevant. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you spent 30 minutes on a phone call with somebody about an issue that has nothing to do with the issue at hand. And so high conflict divorces stay in court because the issue is never the issue. And so you want to focus on what the actual issues are, and you want to model this behavior for your children. Oh. Can't read the last slide, but the last slide says that high conflict personalities won't change. They make a decision that this is the way they're going to be and this is the way they're going to be. People don't resist change. They actually resist being changed. So we're always trying to manipulate and convince them that what they're doing is wrong. I have a really funny story. My ex and my mother have been aligned, and nobody really likes my mom, so I could never really figure it out until I realized that it was really just to hurt me. And I gave it so much energy, and I was always trying to explain to him, you're not doing the right thing. When my mom sends the gifts to your house, send them back to her. That's the right thing to do. And he would say, well, I don't know, I don't care. And it was maddening to me, and I would get so mad, and he would just leave all fine, and I would be rattled for hours with him doing the wrong thing, and I would try to convince him to do the right thing. But whenever we got in the convince and resist dance, it didn't matter what I was saying, and even if what I was saying was 100% right, he was resisting it regardless. And so a few years ago, I made the decision to let go, that I didn't need to own that story anymore, that he was right. He can't really control my mom. He can control his actions. I've told him all the things that he needs to do and the right thing to do, and he's not listening to me, so I let it go. Or I thought I let it go, but about 6 months ago, at my daughter's birthday party, he gave it to them to bring to my house to open the present. And I was like, really? You think that's the solution? And it was just a button pushing for me, and so I was triggered, and I got really upset, and so I realized I hadn't actually fully let it go. And I decided then that that was something I needed to process. It was a story with my mom, and I let it go. And my ex and I just recently had a meeting because we were adjusting our custody. I've been bi-coastal for 8 years, sharing 50-50 custody, and I've recently been remarried and have moved to California full-time. And in doing so, my children are now virtual schooling, and they're living bi-coastal, and I need to have that arrangement and, you know, authorization with my ex. And so we sat down, and we were at Starbucks, and it always goes up and down with emotions because, you know, emotions are contagious, and we're having this conversation, and then we were done and we settled finances and all that thing. And he said to me, he's like, I really am just at a loss with your mom. I'm just really not sure what to do with your mom. Can you help me? I was like, are you kidding me? Like, for 10 years I've been telling you what to do with my mom. But when I let it go, when I made the decision I wasn't going to give it any more power, it wasn't going to control me anymore, voila, he decided to make a change. Now, does that happen every time? No, but I'll tell you, it works, because what you give power to, what you think about, what you focus on, what you fret about, what you worry about, what you stress about, you manifest in your life. Your life is a reality of what you believe you deserve. What you believe you deserve. It is not what you deserve, it's what you believe you deserve in your subconscious mind. And so what I was talking about in the levels of consciousness, what happens is we create a story when we're young, and we create a story, most of us create a story that we don't deserve good things in our life, that we don't deserve to be good parents or to be a parent. We don't deserve to have our children with us. We don't deserve to have a healthy, loving relationship with our spouse. We don't deserve to have a healthy, loving relationship with our parents. We don't deserve, we don't deserve, we don't deserve. And so we put it back here, and then we manifest it every single day. And this is different, I know, than what most of you are used to people talking about up here. But my job is to help you live a self-actualized life, and my job is to help you shift your consciousness around your relationship with your children so that you can reconnect with your children and you'll be ready when they're ready. And you can help them get ready. My father and I reconnected. We tried when I was 18. It was a complete colossal failure. My dad and I were both broken when I was 18. I hated him. I believed all these stories, and I was terrible. I was a terrible, terrible child to him. I was a typical alienated kid. I did all the horrible things that your kids have done and probably more. And I lied about things that my dad did and said. It wasn't true. And so what was I doing? I was processing when I went to see my dad, guilt. Right? But I didn't want to believe that I was guilty. I didn't want to believe I was bad. I wanted to believe he was bad. And some of the things my mother said about my father were true. They were true. But the truth is, we all have good and bad qualities. But I was just focusing on the bad qualities. And so my dad and I clashed. And we clashed for many years until about 9 years ago. No, 6 years ago. I'm aging myself too fast. When I was 36, and my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And it was devastating because I really hadn't made peace with my father, and I was living part-time in the East Coast, and he came out for some procedure, and he stayed at my house for the very first time in 36 years. It was the first time in 31 years I'd actually lived in my house or was physically in the house with my dad an overnight. And we were able to make peace at a level that I never actually ever thought possible. And it wasn't just me taking responsibility, which I did. I took responsibility. My dad was then able to mirror back to me taking responsibility for, and he couldn't remember everything because it had been a long time, but he was able to then turn that mirror around and take responsibility. It only takes one person taking 100% responsibility, 100%, okay? 100% responsibility for your situation to shift the situation. I shift the situation with my dad that day, and we're really close. We talk all the time. And does he drive me crazy? Yes, he drives me crazy, you know. And I remember a time that I would be mad at my dad because he never called me. My dad never calls me. And I would complain about how my dad never called me. And then we reunited, and now my dad calls me all the time. Now I'm like, oh, my dad calls me all the time. So, you know, we're never happy, right? We're always like finding this thing to be a victim over. But anyways, my dad and I are reunited, and we've been close. He's still alive. He is a fighter. I truly believe that my dad's belief is that it's not his time to go. And I also facilitated the reunification. My dad has 7 children, and at the time he had 7 grandchildren. We had to get together with all of my dad's kids for the very first time in one place. The first time some of my siblings had ever met each other in one place at one time. It was miraculous. And the look on my father's face was priceless, really. It's possible. And it doesn't have to happen when your kids become adults. So Bill Eddy talks about this. We're in a perfect storm. We have the victim culture in our family culture, in our family court culture, and our society culture. We are in a culture of the victim mindset, the culture of blame. Somebody's always responsible outside of us for all the bad things happening in our life. And when we focus outside of ourselves, then we can't change what's going on inside of ourselves to change our reality outside. It must change in here. It will not change out here unless you shift your belief system, unless you shift your consciousness around your situation. So the victim culture feeds the mindset, again, of all or nothing thinking, extreme behaviors, and unmanaged emotions. So we think black and white. We're the victim, they're the perpetrator, right? The alienating parent thinks the same way about us. And then they have extreme behaviors, we react with extreme behaviors, then everybody has unmanaged emotions because emotions are contagious. We're mirroring this back to each other, and we stay in what I like to call the spin cycle. And the high conflict personality trait actually has a different way of thinking. Their mind, and I took a bunch of these slides out, but their mind is not wired the same as yours. And so what happens is every situation they experience is a mistaken assessment of danger. Everyone. So even just moving their plate to the left or to the right, they're gonna be like, oh my God, why did you move my plate? Something's going on. That's how their mind works. And so their cortisol levels are so high that they don't know how to regulate themselves. And so their behavior becomes aggressive, and they get negative feedback from therapists, from court, from you, from parents, from other people in the community. Again, emotions are contagious. This isn't kind of coming out right, I think, because this is a PC and I created this on a Mac. But all emotions are contagious, both negative and positive emotions. So the most intense emotions are the most contagious. So have you ever woke up in the morning and just in a like rotten mood, you just had a really, you woke up in a bad mood and you're all cranky and the kids come downstairs and then the kids are all cranky and they start yelling at the kids for being cranky, but the truth is you started it. It's the most intense emotions. They're contagious, they're infectious, and everybody catches them. Positive emotions are the same way. If you can mirror negative, you can also mirror positive emotions. So I'm getting the sign, I only have 5 minutes, and I didn't really get to go through all my slides. So there are 4 basic skills that we're going to teach, or I'm going to teach today, about working with parents that have high conflict personality traits. And if you can teach your kids how to have flexible thinking, how to moderate their behavior and manage their emotions, and also make sure you're checking in with yourself, you will shift your consciousness. You must first do this yourself. You cannot teach what you do not know. And so you can't tell your kids, well, you got to be flexible in the way you think if you're not being flexible in the way that you think. You can't teach them to moderate their behavior when you're screaming at them. And I'm guilty of this. I'll be yelling at my kids. I'll ask my daughter, she's 14, so if any of you have teenagers, you know how wonderful 14-year-old girls are. She doesn't want to do anything the first 50 times I ask her to do it, and then I'm irritated. And I'm like, God, will you just go clean your room, right? I'm irritated. And she's like, well, all you have to do is ask, like, why are you yelling at me? And I'm like, really? So I know we've all experienced that. So we have to keep our behavior moderate. We have to keep our emotions in check to make sure that we're mirroring positive emotions to our kids. And it's really important to teach them these 4 basic skills. If you learn nothing else today from me, write these down. These 4 skills changed my life, and they will change your life too. It changes my relationship. And if you empower your children to understand these skills, you will empower them to help you check yourself. My husband and I have a really funny joke because I think it's the Step Brothers or some Will Ferrell movie that he loves. I think, well, maybe it wasn't Will Ferrell, but he always says, you better check yourself before you wreck yourself. And so it's kind of this on-running joke, and so whenever I say that, it makes me laugh. But so one of the ways that you teach this is what's going on in everyday life. So, for example, I use teachable moments all the time, and you probably all have heard this, but a teachable moment is, an example would be, like we were at the movie theater. I was at the movie theater with my girls a few weeks ago, and the guy behind the counter the guy that was in front of us was on his first date, and he was all trying to be all cool and, impress this girl, and my girls and I were behind him, and the guy behind the counter, tripped and kind of spilled one of those, small sodas at the movie theater on the guy, and it literally went everywhere, and, the guy, you could tell, he was embarrassed, he started freaking out, he was getting agitated, and the guy behind the counter immediately was like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, and let me pay, and he remained really calm, and I said to my children, wow, do you think, that guy did a really good job managing his emotions? And we had a really great dialogue about what was happening. And I'm like, that guy started to get heated and he was getting ready to explode, right? He was embarrassed. But the kid behind the counter was able to manage his emotions. He was able to say, wow, I'm really sorry. And you watch the energy just drop. It went from a potentially colossal nightmare to this just great situation. And it was a teenage kid, some pimple-faced teenager. I was like, good for you. But it was a great teachable moment for me. So when I talk about having flexible thinking is really having alternatives to it. Don't be so rigid. So when you're disputing with somebody that's high conflict, they don't know how to have flexible thinking. They're thinking in one box, right? This is the only way, and if it doesn't happen this way, then my life is over. Their brain is wired to associate based on their lower self that any kind of a loss is death. Oh my gosh, if I lose 1 hour of time with that child, I'm gonna die. My husband was like that. He would literally to the nanosecond calculate out our 50-50 time. I'm like, dude, relax, it's okay. But that's just the wiring of the brain is if I lose, I will die, okay? Another great example could be We use this in our car a lot as you're driving in the car and the guy in front of you is a crazy driver. I have road rage sometimes. I don't know if you guys do too, but driving down the road and, you manage your emotions. So you're thinking, I was talking to my kids, okay, I'm having this like total anger right now, and sometimes I manage it and sometimes I don't. So I'm managing it, and I'll tell my kids, I'm thinking about, dancing with you later on, or singing or something to keep my emotions. I start thinking about positive things. And sometimes when I don't, I'll say, I'll flip the guy off or whatever, and my girls will say to me, wow, you didn't do a really good job managing your emotions in the situation, Mom. Oops. So the important thing to understand is it's a teachable moment, and the truth is nobody's perfect. And I'm not saying you better leave here and you better be perfect at this in every aspect of your life. That's unrealistic. It takes time to form a habit. I think it's 21 days to form a habit. But start implementing doing these things in your life as you talk to your kids and as you model for your kids. It's not what you say to them, it's what you do in front of them. So if the other parent is acting like a crazy person and you're responding like a crazy person, what are your kids gonna do? They're gonna act like crazy people, right? It's just what we do. Karen said this earlier, we're all connected and emotions are contagious. So when your emotions get out of control, your kids' emotions get out of control. And one of the things that I tell everybody, and I think my husband and I do a pretty good job of this, is take responsibility for your actions. If you make a mistake, own it. If you've done something where you didn't have moderate behavior, where you act like a crazy person, you overreacted to something, you didn't manage your emotions, in a calm place, let your kids know, hey, I didn't do a very good job of that. Or you know what, when I divorced your dad, I didn't do a very good job of it. I can see why he would be upset about that. But those are his upset emotions, and they don't have to be your upset emotions or mine. But I take responsibility for that. When you take responsibility for your kids, you teach them to do the same thing. They start taking responsibility for their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions. You're 100% in charge of those. Nobody makes you feel bad. You simply choose to feel bad. Nothing has an emotional charge to it until you assign an emotional charge to it. Nothing. Even your high conflict divorce. It only becomes conflict when you start to butt up against it, even dealing with crazy people. So you can help your kids cope with this by putting yourself in the high conflict parent's shoes. Nobody's going to push me off stage yet? Put yourself in the high conflict parent's shoes. It's hard to do that, but when you do, when you understand where they're coming from, even if it's not a perspective that you understand, you can relax a little bit about what's going on. And you do this with showing empathy. And empathy is understanding how another person feels. You must first seek to understand before you are understood. If you don't, you're going to continue to stay in conflict. And also compassion. One of the things that I use in my coaching practice and I talk to people is to have a photo of the high conflict person as a child. Nobody chooses to be high conflict. Nobody says, gosh, today I think I'm going to become a narcissist. I think that's what I really want to do for the rest of my life. I think I'm going to wake up and I'm acting like I'm so great. I'm going to treat everybody else like a piece of garbage. Nobody does that. Nobody wakes up with abandonment issues saying, well, I want to have this really great fear of abandonment, so I'm going to start going about my life treating everybody like they're abandoning me. Nobody wakes up that way. Nobody makes the decision, and so you have to associate with them as a person. It's hard. I'm not saying it's the easiest thing to do, but if you do, you will shift your consciousness and be able to reduce conflict in your divorce. So again, a reasonable solution is to aim for moderate behavior, to mirror self-control, to remain calm in a crazy situation, to avoid extreme responses, so all or nothing responses, right? Oh, you want custody? Well, I'm going to sue you for custody, and that's where you stay stuck, okay? And then be a reasonable alternative. Have a reasonable alternative to what is going on. I never send a client who coaches with me into court without at least a minimum of 2 choices of what they're willing to compromise on, and having a complete case in order. Don't go in and respond to whatever the action is or whatever the fear the button that's being poked at that time. You'll keep going back, and you'll keep going back, and you'll keep going back, and you're going to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on therapy and on attorney fees and not have the results that you're looking for. They told me it's over. I was pretending like I didn't see that sign. So I have a lot of other things to talk about, but I've run out of time, so I will leave you with this. If you have any questions, I'll be here. I am offering a special for my 10-week co-parenting class. I haven't taught the class live in a long time. I have other certified teachers that teach it, but I am doing a 10-week live class online. So anybody who signs up for that class today, I'm also offering 2 bonuses. One, a copy of my book, I Love You Both. It's an ebook, and it goes through all of this that I shared with you today in depth, step-by-step detail on how to actually implement this, and also 1 free hour of one-on-one coaching with me. And we'll send you a session prep form so that you don't waste your time with me talking about your situation, because that hour could be sucked up pretty quickly. But to actually share with me, I ask very strategic questions on your situation so that the hour that you spend with me is focused on solutions to your specific situation. I understand that there are all kinds of levels of dealing with conflict and divorce, and so I want to make sure that that time with you is spent really focused on helping you shift your consciousness and take action in your life. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'll be here if you have any questions. I really appreciate the time. Have an amazing day.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Ling. Again, I'm the co-president and the registrar. I'm also a mother of 3 boys, and one of whom is seriously alienated from me. I'm here to present our next speaker, Catherine MacWillie. Catherine brings with her the perspective from a law enforcement officer in dealing with parental alienation. As a police officer for 24 years, she was the first responder to domestic situations. From this unique vantage point, she often witnessed family dysfunctions and alienation as it was unfolding. In particularly, the strategy of filing false abuse charges that some alienators use to gain leverage in court proceedings. I, unfortunately, have also had that experience of being falsely accused. Catherine is passionate about reforming the system to stop this kind of abuse. She has served as a board member of Parental Alienation Awareness Organization, PAAO, and they're back there today. They have a table. Please visit them. And she was also a prior president of Stop Alienation of Children, SPAC. She has partnered with Jane Major and appeared on numerous media outlets in speaking about PA. And Jane's organization, Breakthrough Parenting, is also here with us today, and their table is back there. Even though we have just recently met, I instantly felt her genuineness and compassion, and I'm happy she's my friend. Please help me welcome Catherine MacWillie.
Well, good morning. I am so pleased to be here, and I'm really so proud of how far some of you have come to be here today. It's very impressive, and it shows your commitment to trying to make a change both in your family and to the entire issue. So really, congratulations, and it's my privilege to be here. This is the tagline for Huffington Post. It's called, "Marriages come and go, but divorce is forever." I don't know if you're familiar with the Huffington Post, but they're an online newspaper. They have a whole section devoted to marriage, and I just think it's a great tagline because it is true. I am the CEO for Custody Calculations, Calendars, and Orders. I'm also a retired law enforcement officer. I was with the Los Angeles Police Department for 24 years. I started dealing with divorce and custody probably 30 years ago now, long before terms such as parental alienation syndrome, hostile and aggressive parenting even existed or were conceived of. Most of that time was obviously as a police officer, radio calls, child abuse investigations, drunk driving task forces. Unfortunately, many people under the stress of a divorce end up having one drink too many, or under the stress they make bad choices, or they're not realizing how much their body changes, and they end up making the mistake and drink and drive and become arrested. So a lot of arrests around divorce and drunk driving. I also worked juvenile detectives and a lot of other specialized units. At the time of my retirement, I'm very proud of the fact that I was one of the 3 oldest officers still in the field in my division and the oldest woman still in the field in my division. So obviously, I saw a lot of devastation to divorce, homicides, suicides, abductions, child abuse, domestic violence, violence of restraining orders, violence of violation of court orders, stalking, and more. What happened is that really prompted me to take another look at how we view divorce and how impacting it is. And I was really committed to wanting to try to figure out what could be done and where to change the system, because it's awful. I started out by interviewing other officers. I certainly had my own knowledge base, but I wanted to interview other officers. I actually went out and interviewed officers on my own time with other departments. I actually interviewed fire department personnel, teachers, school administrators. I also went through training and did interviews with Ed Edelman's Children's Court, Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, Los Angeles Juvenile Courts, Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, also known as the AFCC. They're primarily responsible for all the training in family law. The result is, after all these interviews, after all this training, after all my experience, what I had was a much wider scope that was far more comprehensive than anybody in the system. Traditionally, when the courts have looked at what could be done to change the system, they start off with questions with parents that say, so, were you given time to talk to the judge? Did you feel you were listened to? Now, I'm not saying they're not important, but towards fixing the problem, they weren't going to be significant. They weren't going to be in-depth enough to fix what was wrong. The interviews we did, or the interviews, and I say we because I always think of this as a collective effort. All the families that I interviewed and all the people in the divorce industry that we interviewed, the special masters, the parenting evaluators, unification counselors, private detectives, counselors, therapists, drug and alcohol centers. One of the stories that surprised me when I interviewed one of the counseling centers was they disclosed to me that one of the worst episodes they'd ever seen in working with the family was diapers that had been written in the diaper, I'm going to kill you. I hate you if you don't stop seeing this person. Or they would tell stories about children had had notes hidden in their coats from one parent to the other. One parent might put notes in the jacket, and then when the other parent took it off, they would see the notes. So when you start going outside the courts, you start getting even a larger picture, and that's why the background, to law enforcement was so important, because that opened the door to what was really going on outside the courtroom. Now, my perspective also is not limited just to the U.S. It's also internationally as well. The Hague Treaty is a treaty dealing specifically with international abduction, and the ultimate act of parental alienation is abduction. Okay, I also receive calls from Canada, Europe, Australia, Asia. Get calls from Europeans who say, I was married to an American. They have now returned to the U.S. now that we're divorced. I don't understand the system. What can you do to help me, to guide me? So the issue of divorce is really a global issue. It's a global problem, and so is the violence that accompanies it. Now, what my research identified is that perhaps as much as 25% of all the crime in this country is related to family law. 25%. 25% of the homicides, 25% of the suicides, 25% of the abductions, domestic violence. Now, when somebody hears that, that number sounds pretty invasive. But when you start putting an actual label and identifying what those numbers look like, for homicide alone, that's 3,600 to 4,000 homicides a year. The numbers have varied over the last 10 years. I think this year, I think we've all been seeing in the news lately, it's been a little world's gone mad. So this year we might go over 4,000 for homicides related to family law. Now, in the majority of homicides, the suspects are known to the victim. And according to the training by the District Attorney's Office, nearly all our mass shootings are committed by family members. Department of Justice reports that children under the age of 4 in the U.S. are more likely to die from a homicide than from cancer or a contagious disease. Think about that. More likely to die from a homicide. And we're not talking about rural areas, low poverty areas, we're talking about in general. Now, many of us in law enforcement feel that we've seen an increase in the number of child homicides related to divorce and custody, children who are actually murdered by their own parents in the ultimate act of retribution and revenge against the other parent, both during, prior, and after. Now, the reason that some of these numbers become important, and I'll go through that in just a moment, when we start talking about missing children, almost 95% of all the children who go missing, 250 to 275,000 of them every year, these are not abductions by strangers. 95% are committed by family members or persons known to the family. Only 5% are strangers. Again, those numbers vary over a 10-year period. Now, this is a number that people don't talk about very often and why it's so important for this group to recognize. Officially, we report that approximately 3.5 million child abuse investigations are conducted a year. That's by Department of Children's Services. Now, they also go by the name of Social Services, DCS, DCFS, and so on. But that's their number, 3.5 million. And that is against 6 million children per year. But that's not a good number because 3.5 doesn't include the fact that there's multiple investigations for each one of those investigations. Almost every single investigation conducted by social services is also conducted by a police department, and vice versa. Then, if the investigation starts off with a school or a hospital, they'll have a level of investigation too. And then, after the reports are initially done, then detectives become involved, district attorneys get involved, and these children are continued to be put through a process by which the system itself victimizes the children. Now, what that means is that the numbers for actual child abuse investigations are somewhere around 12 to 15 million. 12 to 15 million. So, if you look around this room, what you look at is nearly all of you at some point in your divorce will be involved in an investigation. Now, 40% of those 3.5 million investigations by social services, 40% of them are identified as inconclusive, which means they can't prove it occurred and they can't disprove it. Now, when I've talked to the workers, their feelings are, of that category, 90% are related to family law. 90%. One parent filing against another for an advantage in family law, or someone acting on behalf of that family member to gain an advantage in family law. Because family law is not a factor that we track when we collect data on crime. When we collect data on homicides, when we collect data on child abuse, we don't ask what the causative factors are. So right now, we don't have the technology or the databases to collect it. So my focus has been more, not so much on the allegations that are sustained, but the allegations that are not sustained, and determined what do we do with these. Because those are where a lot of the parents are being, caught up in the process. At the same time, we have a lot of parents that are found guilty of a child abuse investigation that later on we're able to prove through a court process, but that's a $60,000 process for most parents. Yes, if you're facing allegations of child abuse, most attorneys, good attorney for a criminal case, their retainer is $25,000. And by the time you're done with a court trial and you're done with your experts and you've paid pre-trial pre-trial and afterwards, that's what you're looking at, $50,000 to $60,000. And now we're catching up to that. This particular story right here, this is a train crash. It actually happened in the division where I was assigned. I wasn't working that day. This was a man who was going through a divorce. He wanted to commit suicide. He had attempted earlier and he had failed. So he thought, okay, I'm going to go park my car on the railroad tracks because I know I won't change my mind, and even if I do, if a train hits me, there won't be any decision process. It will be over. The problem was, as he sat on the train tracks, he did change his mind, but he couldn't get his car started. He jumped free of the car, but the train derailed, and I think it was 11 people died. 11 people who had no connection to that divorce. 11 people who never knew that person existed till that day. This is a story about 2 children who were picked up by one of their parents. And I have to tell you, most of the time I try not to identify the genders because my position is I don't care if you're a man or a woman. If you violate those court orders, that's what I care about. You may not be happy with your court orders, but you need to obey them. Now, part of the problem is our courts don't force that position. They make people spend all this money to go to court to get these court orders that they don't enforce. Parental alienation exists almost solely because the courts are not enforcing the court orders. And I'm not going to say that the law enforcement is doing a very good job of it either. We are not, and I'm going to go into that in just a moment. These are the Porter children. There were 2 little children. Sam was 7 and Lindsay was 8. She was picked up by one of her parents for custody. They were never seen again. The bodies were never found. The parent was convicted. The bodies were still, he never disclosed where the bodies were. So finally what they did is they sat him down and they said, we're going to release you into the prison population. Now, I don't think it's a secret to anybody what prison rules are by the rest of the inmates if you've hurt or harmed children. He confessed and told the police exactly where the children had been buried, and 3 years later, they were able to retrieve the bodies. Here's a millionaire. This is a pretty amazing story. Millionaire in Texas, in Las Vegas, owns a pawn shop. He goes through a terrible, terrible divorce. He is so upset, he goes back to his pawn shop, he pulls out one of his rifles, and from 2 football fields away, he aims at the courthouse and he hits the judge who ruled on his case, who was having a cigarette standing next to one of the windows from 2 football fields away. This is a situation where, let's see, ex-wife, I've got to change this because I'm catching up with all the current stories as well as keeping track with some of these. And we used to try to change out our stories, but we couldn't keep up with them. It's just tragic. Essentially, you have a lot of suicides, you have a lot of homicides pending court dates. We have a man in New York, went through a divorce. 24 hours before he went to court, he went in and bludgeoned his wife and killed his children and then committed suicide. In this particular situation, it was a man who killed his wife and he critically injured his daughter. Now, we also have the other situation where women have murdered their children. This is not one-sided. Now, in this particular instance, remember I talked about suicides. This was 2 parents going through a horrible situation. The mother goes into the room and the child had hung themselves. 16 years old, couldn't take it. In the city where I live one day, a 14-year-old hung herself during her parents' divorce. This is a story about a mother who kidnapped her child to Canada. This story right here, you'll notice the headlines say, advocates say father's death the cause of parental alienation. This was, for the most part, the big story that put parental alienation on the map. This is the Rick Lowenstrau case. And what happened is it was a couple going through a very bad high-conflict divorce. He was an emergency room doctor. She was a nurse. There was 2 children. They went to exchange custody. The child sat in the back seat behind the driver. His father was the driver. He pulled out a handgun that he had retrieved from his mother's closet and shot his father through the back seat. His father was killed. The shooting occurred in Texas. The boy was convicted. The very powerful organization called Help Stop PAS was begun by many of the co-workers of the man who was murdered. And they were very successful in pulling together all of these very, very high-profile people. And they put out huge billboards, and they really tried to include it in the trial. But the boy was convicted. There is a good note, though, however. Just within the past, I believe it's 18 months, the boy has been released into his grandmother's care. Now, the point that I'm making here and that we're building to, and why I was trying to lead into all the interviews and all the training, is family law is invasive now to every aspect of society. Schools and classrooms, children being enrolled and unenrolled, school budgets. You know, people probably are unaware of the fact that because of all the violation of court orders, all these children being enrolled and unenrolled, school districts are setting up whole departments. They're having to set up budgets to deal with violation of court orders. And just imagine how disruptive that is for teachers, you know, spending all that time to bring a student up to, you know, the rest of the class, fitting them into the class. They come in at different periods of the school year. And then you have the other aspect where you have parents fighting on school grounds, disturbances at school events. Another area where the police often get involved is children left at school. The parent says, it's daddy's job to pick you up today. Daddy says it's mom's job to pick you up today. So the child is sitting there at school and nobody's picked them up. I can't tell you the number of times where I've had children cling to me because they don't know where their parents are, the school's called us, and now it's a child abuse investigation. Hospitals, emergency rooms, doctor's office, mental health, counseling, depression, nervous breakdowns. I have a client just was hospitalized for 2 weeks in Texas on a nervous breakdown. So parents are taking kids into the hospitals, into the emergency rooms, trying to get the evidence to file child abuse allegations. In one report that I read, I actually saw in the margins where it said, one of the parents was saying, no, this parent is terrible. You need to call social services. I'm scared what's going to happen to the future if no one drops in. And each time the child had previously been brought in, the hospital had refused to do that because the child had said, no, I do this. No, this is what happened. But finally, the hospital called. And the same thing is happening at the doctor's office. If the children aren't going to the emergency room, they're going to the doctor's office. Mental health, same thing. Only what the parent does that says, oh, I support them. I don't know why this isn't happening. I know it's nothing they're doing wrong. It just must be tough. Well, let me tell you what I'm telling the guardian ad litems, what I'm telling the attorneys, what I'm telling the parents, and what we're telling the other side is we need to see measurable outcomes, just like any scientific study. Your measure by which we will judge your performance as a parent is going to be based on what you perform and show us, which is if you have Skype calls. If your Skype call is 30 seconds, the parent who has primary custody is not fulfilling their commitment. Their commitment is to make sure the children are in front of that Skype call, that they speak and communicate with the children. Not, yeah, no, hang up. In fact, what I do with some of my clients, one in particular just recently, her phone calls, her Skype calls were just that, yes, no, nope. So the mother had become so upset in the process. The father had primary custody. What we did is I had her wear a funny mask on her face. So when the kids turned on the Skype call, she was wearing like a mask, a funny clown mask. And then what I had her do is I had her dial my phone number. She put the phone plug in her ear so I could hear the phone call between the child and her, and then I would prompt her, be more animated, say, oh, that sounds like fun. You got to stay in your room all day and you didn't do anything? I wish I could stay in my room all day. Wow, what'd you have for dinner? So we teach the parents how to do skills, because we have to rebuild this relationship. You have to work extra hard. But we're saying to the guardian ad litem, when we meet with them, now I'm not there, I'm doing most of this all by phones. I've only ever met one client in all this time. We do everything by phone, fax, emails, and texts. What we did is we just recently had a meeting with a guardian ad litem. We had them do something they'd never done before. Prior to the custody, we had the guardian ad litem meet with the mother and the father, tell the father that is the decision of the courts that this agreement be enforced. It's the best interest of the child. The courts have already ruled on that. Dad, you need to make sure this happens. Then we had the guardian ad litem meet with the children and the mother and explain to the children what was going to happen. And now it looks like we're finally going to make some step forwards. Now, I also want to talk about business and employers. You know, most of you are probably familiar with the headlines of the shooting in Seal Beach, where a parent lost custody after a very difficult case, and he went into where the other parent worked, a beauty salon, and shot and killed her. 7 people not associated with that business other than being clients were killed. It is considered the largest mass shooting in the history of Orange County. Now, but if you look at even the less effects of that, which is you start having employees taking sick time, inability to focus at work, errors in manufacturing, missed deadlines, lost in employee productivity. I mean, think about it. I mean, how much get up and go do you have when, you know, compared to after your divorce? It's hard just to get out of bed in the morning. You know, some of my clients call me and said, I can't get out of bed. Okay, this is what we're going to do. So that's the impact to your employers. That's the impact to their businesses. And here's the other thing I tell my clients too. When they say, I've got this great job promotion, oh, that promotion will go away. I have not had a single client change jobs during their divorce and keep it, because you're going to have court dates. And your new employer is not going to be able to give you the luxury they hired you to perform, and you're not going to be able to. It also impacts the workman's compensation system because of the sick time, high blood pressure, strokes, anxiety attacks. A lot of times those are all identified for work. Civil and criminal liability, violence in the workplace. Let me give you some examples. An employee driving a company vehicle. You see them out there all the time. UPS, Federal Express, U.S. Post Office, police officers. Distracted, pending a court date, they become involved in a traffic accident. Employers now subject to a civil action. Or, as I said, workman's comp. Employees are off on doctor's orders because of high blood pressure. Might be applied to workman's comp, might be the sick time. And then here's our mass shooting. So what we're starting to do is talk to business owners. When you have employees going through divorce, you might need to take extra steps, not only to make it easier on your employee, but to make it more safe for everyone there that is at your place of employment. Financial institutions are also affected by divorce. Slow pays on credit cards, bank loans, personal lines of credit. As the costs mount for a divorce, most people file bankruptcy. I don't know if you know the numbers. The average divorce per party for an amicable divorce, $25,000 each. $25,000 each, starting to get a little bit more difficult, $50,000. High conflict, you start at 100. Start at 100. And when I talked to someone just recently, they said, I don't have that kind of money. I said, you will. You will. You're going to find it somewhere. Now, I'm probably one of the few people in the divorce industry that says the better job I do, the less money I get paid. I don't want my clients selling their homes. I don't want them taking out lines of credit. I don't want them to hire an attorney when they don't need one. I want them to hire an attorney when they do need one. I try to look at their money as if it's mine. So we're in this together. But people cannot afford the cost. We're talking about $1,400 an hour and more over years and years. You can't take care of your kids. You can't provide a home for them. So a lot of what I do is keep parents out of court, if at all possible. Now, here's something else. This is a new dirty trick that's being played. If one of the spouses files for bankruptcy and the other one doesn't, they're going to be left holding the bag. Now, in the old days, it used to be one person filed and the other person was able to some extent, be cleared of those fees. Not anymore. Now, real estate. Even the real estate market is being affected. Buy and sell homes, divide assets, pay off debts, foreclosures. Now, special note here. A lot of people don't pay attention to the move-out orders. They're not complete enough. The refinancing of the home, that should be handled entirely different than it is. Most of the time, clients are told, oh, just quick claim it. Yeah, it won't be a big deal. Problem is, you quick claim that deed to the other party, you can't get another loan because you're still obligated to the family home. And if that person cannot refinance, you've given away the home, which is fine if that's the agreement you want to make, but make it so that you aren't hurt in the process, which is they get refinanced while you're still in the home. You don't move out until that's done. Because I've had clients who contact me, hear about me later on. They've already moved out of the family home. The other person stops making the payments. The equity's lost. They never get their share of the equity. Or the market goes down. Another client upset because the housing market went from $200,000 equity to $25,000, their share. So it's very important that you talk to your attorneys under how and when to move out, how to deal with financing. Now, here's another dirty trick that's happening. Right now, California, Texas, and some other states, if you receive the home as your sole property and you did not refinance it and you fall behind in your payments, the other person can go to court and they can force the sale of your home as an injured party because their credit was hurt. In Texas, a client that I was working with, that's exactly what happened to her. Can I have that number again, please? Okay. Now, many of you came here today and you wanted to learn about law enforcement. I'm going to back it up here. 3 most important questions I'm asked. Does law enforcement receive any training on parental alienation? How does law enforcement deal with cases involving parental alienation? Is there any awareness by officers on the issue of parental alienation? There's no training given to officers, which only makes sense when you consider that the experts can't agree on it. The experts can't agree, so we're not going to jump in. I'm still a reserve officer. We're not going to jump in. So until the experts make that decision, they're not going to start training on it. Now, even in the foreseeable future, when I was thinking about this issue, I couldn't see how it would possibly go into play here. Because when it really comes down to it, as a law enforcement agency, we enforce the law. What your motivation is when you were shooting the other person, what your motivation is when you stole the car, mildly interesting, but we're here to process crime. We're here to solve crime. So the motivation of parental alienation, I didn't see and haven't seen as an issue. But now that I'm starting to look at measurable results and putting that kind of diagnostic tool on custody evaluations and custody assessments, now I'm saying, why couldn't we maybe use PA as a diagnostic tool in evaluating these allegations by children? So let me say that even though law enforcement does not recognize it, does not deal with it, as soon as an officer hears that we're dealing with a divorce, the statements start changing, the scope of the allegations, the claims start to become bizarre. We may not know what the name is, and I say we, again, because I'm a reserve officer still, and once an officer, always. They They get it. We don't know what the label is, most of them, but they get it. Okay, how does law enforcement deal with cases involving PAS? Don't. As I said, no recognition of it. But as soon as the officers hear it's a divorce case, then they start looking at it more seriously, starting to take it apart more seriously. And the same is true with domestic violence. Is there any awareness? That's probably one of the most important questions you want to know. Is there any awareness on the issue of parental alienation by an officer when he's responding to your radio call? And the answer is no, unless it's affected them personally. Unless they've gone through a divorce, the officers won't know. Now, the other difficult news to tell you today is if you've never filed a police report for custody violations, most small police departments for years now, they give you a two-part form. You fill it out yourself. The officers, the departments, they don't even fill it out for you. You fill it out. They give you one copy, you walk away with it. They essentially file that copy and tell you, you need to go to court. They do not do anything with the paperwork. Now, LAPD was a holdout. They at least still continued to take police reports. As of 2 or 3 years ago, that stopped. That's no longer available. They tell you it's a civil matter. I think that's an atrocity. We are law enforcement officers. It is our duty to enforce court orders. But because the courts do not enforce court orders, it's all a trickle-down effect. Now, just before I came here today, I wasn't sure if maybe the department, because so many people, even within the department, disagree with that position, if they had changed it, and they have not, and that's as of 48 hours ago. Now, the reason why the policy of LAPD was so important when they changed it is because the U.S. military has chosen to use the use of force policy by LAPD for the U.S. military. Not their policy, but LAPD. That shows you that when LAPD says we're not going to take custody order violations, that means everybody else is going to stop. If they were doing it, they're going to stop. So at my own expense, I've contacted a firm that is creating a comprehensive new policy for law enforcement agencies that when it is completed, it will be presented at a yearly conference held by law enforcement and the chief of police for organizations around the country come here. It's the most important law enforcement training, and it's chief of police. These are the people that set the policies. Now, I have to tell you, I'm a long way off from it. It isn't one little piece of paper where you write it. I had to hire people who wrote policies for LAPD and other agencies. We're putting a whole package together. So the discipline, the policies, the training orders, everything is done for them. Very important. Calling the police to become involved in your divorce is risky business. It's just as risky as going to court. I had a client call the police for assistance. While they were waiting, they called me. They told me what was going on. Thank you, 5 minutes. Told me what they had doing, why they were waiting. And before I could tell them, leave right now, they said, oh, the police are here, and hung up. I happened to have known his family. I called the family up and I said, your son right now, what you choose to do to help him will change his life. Next call I got, he had been arrested. Family friend. He's early 20s, family friend. I don't know what to do. I said, it's okay. His parents jumped in, we got him an attorney, he got bailed out. I hate these stories. Luckily, like I said, the happy ending was, because the attorney that I referred the family to was excellent, they were both a family law attorney and a criminal law. And folks, if you are not asking your family law attorneys if they know criminal law, should be one of the questions you ask them at your next appointment. Do you handle criminal law? Have you done child abuse investigations? Now, I think I'm probably down to 1 minute if I'm lucky. You know, it's so tough. I could do a whole presentation, as you can see, just on dealing with law enforcement. But here's what you have to know. Dealing with false child abuse allegations, most attorneys and I'll bet maybe only one or two in this room even know about it. California has what's called the CCAI Index, California Child Abuse Index. If your name is put on a police report, and even if there are no charges filed against you, you are never brought to trial, you are never convicted of a crime, if the detective feels that you were involved, that we just didn't have enough evidence, let me catch up here. Sorry. It's a little bit further. I'm having to jump forward because of the time. Your name will be put on this index as a suspected child abuser for 10 years. 10 years. You have the right, they'll send you a letter by the child abuse unit that your name's now been entered. Now, in fairness to the detectives, children are very convincing. And what is our job? Our job as parents, our jobs as police officers to protect children. So we are actually more vulnerable than you are as parents. We want to protect the child, so we are more inclined to believe the child, especially initially. We don't get that relationship with them till later. I'm over. I'll stop in just a moment. You can come back and ask me questions. But folks, the policy has been in place for about 12 or 13 years. The goal of the Suspected Child Abuse Index was noble. We wanted to track potential pedophiles that we were losing track of, who were moving state to state, and that was the goal. But I'm telling you, the bulk of the names on this Central Child Abuse Index are parents going through high conflict divorces. You should know what your response is going to be the minute the officers knock on your door, because that's the first time you're going to find out about a child abuse investigation. It's not like your spouse is going to call you up and say, you know, I've been thinking about this, and you know, I think I'm going to file child abuse against you. You know, hey, just want to give you the heads up, you know, because I'm concerned about you. No, the first response you're going to get about an investigation against you is when social services knocks on your door and the police officer knocks on your door. You should be talking to your attorney. What do I need to do to protect myself? Before, after, and during. What is it I need to say? That's a seminar just in itself. Go ahead.